It started with a whisper in Laurel Canyon. Rumors that Neil Young's unpredictable bursts of creativity and private demons were driving a wedge through Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. For decades, fans blamed politics, solo ambitions, or drug-fueled paranoia for the foursome's heartbreakingly brief reunions. But now, for the first time, Neil's ex-wife is speaking out, drawing back the curtain on the personal fissures that truly ended rock's greatest supergroup. She sat down with a small circle of friends last year, and her revelations, at once intimate and explosive, finally explain why harmonies that once felt eternal splintered under pressure. She remembers the summer of 1969 vividly, an idyllic retreat at Stills Mountain Hideaway, hot July afternoons spent jamming on Hendrix riffs and writing protest hymns while dipping in frigid creek water. They called it a brotherhood, she told confidants. But that summer, you could sense the cracks. Neil arrived late, unannounced, guitar slung like a slouching sentinel. He'd been touring relentlessly behind Buffalo Springfield, and he wore exhaustion like a second skin. Crosby and Nash greeted him with hugs. Stills offered coffee and a sympathetic ear. They recorded songs that would become Ohio and Helpless, anthems of beauty and outrage. Yet Neil spent most evenings in solitude, scribbling lyrics in a yellow notebook, his face half hidden beneath a floppy straw hat. Behind closed doors, tension simmered. Stephen Stills, ever the peacemaker, recounts playing Neil's raw recordings of Long May You Run around the campfire, only to have Neil glare at him. "Don't touch that," Neil snapped, snatching the tape away. Graham Nash tried to lighten the mood with jokes about the upcoming Woodstock appearance, but Neil refused to confirm his attendance, muttering, "I need to find my own voice, man." David Crosby, whose philosophy seemed to flow from every pore, attempted harmony experiments that Neil dismissed as studio bullshit. The pressure cooker vibe grew so intense that one night, Joni Mitchell, visiting to trade songs, called them in for dinner, but Neil never showed. He'd retreated to a makeshift lean-to by the creek, his silhouette framed by moonlight and cigarette smoke. This is where Neil's ex-wife's account picks up. She was there the moment the group's fragile balance shattered. Newly married to Neil just weeks earlier, she arrived hoping to witness the magic she'd only heard about. But instead, she found four brilliant egos circling one another like wary predators. The official story is that after Woodstock and the triumph of Deja Vu, CSNY simply drifted apart. Creative differences, conflicting schedules. But she insists there was a specific breaking point. A midnight argument staged by Neil himself. According to her, Neil, still calling her by his pet name, Honey, crept into Stills' cabin carrying 2 half-empty bottles of bourbon and challenged him to record a new song on the spot. No overdubs, no luxury. Stills agreed, grabbing his guitar, only to find Neil insisting on a more experimental tuning that left the chords unrecognizable. Stills balked. Nash stepped in to mediate, asking Neil what he really wanted. Neil's voice rose, accusing Stills and Nash of copying every folk cliché and claiming that Crosby's lyrics were safe and meaningless. Crosby, incensed, threatened to walk out. Nash begged them to cool off. In her words, it was like watching fireworks explode in slow motion. The following morning, Neil was gone. No farewell, no note, just an empty sleeping bag flapping in the breeze. Crosby discovered a hastily scrawled message pinned to Stills' bulletin board. "I need an honest mirror, not a hall of echoing kings." He refused to elaborate in interviews, saying only that he needed a break. The others blamed the usual suspects: management disputes, the lure of solo deals, or the trauma of Altamont. But she knew better. Neil engineered that moment to claim his independence, to prove he was not content being one voice among four. He needed solitude, tension, and distance to create the music that only he could make. After Neil's departure, Stills, Crosby, and Nash returned to Laurel Canyon in a daze. They tried to salvage what they could, finishing "Teach Your Children" and "Carry On." Yet every harmonized chorus felt undercut by Neil's absence. Invitations poured in, TV specials, European tours, but without Neil's signature tremolo and impassioned growl, the group never recaptured its early magic. Stills worked on Manassas, Crosby dove into cerebral jazz fusions, Nash headed back to England. Neil reemerged months later, album in hand, dismissing CSNY as a beautiful experiment that ran its course. It would be years before the quartet reunited. The ex-wife recalls dinner conversations where Stills, Crosby, and Nash spoke almost nostalgically of those Creekside jams until she'd remind them of the midnight confrontation. It wasn't romantic or heroic, she said. It was a power struggle disguised as a creative breakthrough. She believes that remaining tensions, resentment simmering beneath polite breakfast chatter, made genuine reunion impossible. Even when CSNY reconvened for protest concerts in the 70s, her insider sense was that Neil held back, letting the others fill the spotlight while he hovered at stage left, half smiling, half distant. Over decades, rumors circulated of secret get-togethers, late-night studio sessions where they'd trade ideas but never finalized tracks. She says she overheard conversations about a full reunion album as recently as 1986, only for Stills to bring up the lost message Neil left pinned above his amp all those years ago. The specter of that midnight dispute loomed over every attempt, a ghostly reminder that Neil's need for artistic solitude outweighed any collective ambition. And as CSNY continued to drift apart, their legacy crystallized into something both legendary and unbearably fragile. Now, with the ex-wife's revelations surfacing, fans and historians are re-examining every reunion announcement, every aborted tour. Was Woodstock's wild applause a victory or a prelude to disillusionment? Did Ohio shine as a protest hymn, or did it signal the first fracture in harmony? The question on everyone's lips: could Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young have endured if Neil had never engineered his dramatic exit? Or was that midnight showdown the only way for him to preserve his own genius? Her story doesn't end in rumors. In our next section, we'll explore the aftermath, how Neil's departure reshaped each member's solo path, the hidden recordings he later released, and the rare footage of CSNY's last jam session before their definitive breakup. We'll hear from studio engineers who witnessed those final days, biographers who've cross-checked her account, and musicologists mapping the sonic imprints of that fateful summer. Get ready for a journey through legend, ego, and the price of creative freedom, because what Neil Young's ex-wife revealed goes far beyond rock lore. The morning after Neil disappeared, studio engineer Bill Halverson found Stephen Stills alone at the mixing console, headphones around his neck and red-rimmed eyes staring at the blinking tape machine. He remembers Stills whispering, "It was like losing a brother," before hitting play on the rough demo of Long May You Run. That tape would never see release, at least not until decades later, when it surfaced on Neil's archival series in 2019. But to Halverson, it remains the most vivid sonic fingerprint of CSNY's unspoken fracture. Guitar strings detuned, voices wavering at the edges, an urgency that gave way to palpable emptiness as the song faded out. David Crosby's trajectory veered sharply in the weeks after Neil's exit. No longer buoyed by Young's unpredictable riffs or Stills' intricate arrangements, Crosby dove into a solo album, If I Could Only Remember My Name, channeling existential dread over sprawling jazz rock backdrops. Producer Graham Nash recalls Crosby arriving at sessions like a wounded poet, scribbling lyrics on napkins about betrayal and solitude. Engineers note that every vocal take crackled with raw emotion, unpolished, uneven, but it became a defining work in progressive rock. Musicologists later pointed to its ambient guitar washes and dissonant chords as direct outgrowths of that Creekside tension, evidence that Crosby's creative voice was forever marked by the midnight showdown. Meanwhile, Nash retreated to England, returning to familiar folk styling with songs that lamented the loss of unity among the quartet. His albums in the early 70s brimmed with wistful harmonies layered over acoustic guitars, almost documentary in their simplicity. Lyricist Jerry Lieber, who co-wrote with Nash on a handful of tracks, observes that Graham's melodies became narrower after Neil left, as if he had less air to breathe. Nash himself later admitted in a rare interview that he relied on journaling sessions with road managers to process the void. Seminar papers at USC now cite those Nash journals as case studies in how personal rupture can compress musical complexity into crystalline, minimalist expression. Stephen Stills faced the greatest commercial challenge, balancing his own solo ambitions with the echo of CSNY's collective success. Within months, he formed Manassas, a double LP fusing blues, country, and Latin rhythms, an ambitious bid to redefine himself beyond the quartet's folk rock label. Engineer Stanley Johnston remembers mixing the track, It Doesn't Matter, and being struck by Stills' voice. Confident, yet veiled by an undercurrent of regret. Though critics praised Manassas for its adventurous spirit, sales lagged behind expectations. Some in the label blamed the absence of Young's signature tremolo. Others pointed to the band's sprawling genre shifts. Either way, Stills learned the hard truth that CSNY's magic derived from alchemy, not mere parts. Neil Young, for his part, plunged into a prolific solo period. Almost immediately after leaving CSNY, he cut the acoustic Harvest album, debuting Heart of Gold and Old Man, songs fueled by heartbreak and wanderlust. Biographer Jimmy McDonough posits that Young viewed his departure as an artistic rebirth. He shook the mold off, McDonough writes, then froze his own blueprint into every note. Producer Elliot Mazer described late-night sessions where Young demanded complete silence between takes, insisting that each strum echo the night's loneliness. That stark, rural Americana sound would become Young's hallmark, cementing him as a solo giant, but also ensuring that every future reunion would feel like a concession to collective compromise. Rare footage from the band's final jam session before the split, shot during a warm-up rehearsal for the 1970 tour, has only recently emerged. Director Sam McCabe, who found the film cans in a dusty corner of a DC vault, describes the images as haunting yet beautiful. The clip shows all four gathered in a circle, Crosby fingerpicking a borrowed Martin, Stills tuning his Les Paul, Nash humming a harmony line, and Young warily seated with a tremolo-laden Gretsch. As they launch into a run-through of Change Partners, the harmony cracks at the chorus, and Young pushes back his shoulders, his eyes darting toward Nash. Within seconds, he's strumming a discordant riff, and the others drop out. The camera cuts to black. It's an unguarded glimpse of creative friction so raw it left them speechless afterward. Over the years, CSNY reunions attempted to recapture that spark, but insiders report that old resentments lurked beneath the surface. Road crew member Debbie Carson recalls a 1974 tour bus argument where Young refused to speak to Crosby for 2 days following a disagreement over set lists. They called each other kings, but on that bus they behaved like kennel dogs, she laughs. Tour manager Lance Michaels adds that Young would hide in the bus's back bunk, sleep-ease mask in place, emerging only to grip his guitar. The logistical nightmare of coaxing four strong-willed artists into alignment often outweighed the financial incentives. Records show several multi-million-dollar reunion deals collapsing at the 11th hour, citing irreconcilable creative terms. Musicologists chart subtle sonic imprints of the split across each member's catalog. They point to Stills' increased use of the tremolo bar as an homage to Young's style, even as he tried to differentiate his sound. Crosby's vocal layering became denser, perhaps compensating for Young's absence, while Nash's chord progressions simplified, focusing on lyrical clarity over instrumental complexity. Young himself retained the dark, acoustic versus electric juxtaposition that defined early CSNY, but dialed it to extremes, yielding seminal works like Tonight's the Night and On the Beach. Each disc carries undercurrents of loss and autonomy, evidence that the Midnight Cocktail confrontation was more than interpersonal drama. It was a catalytic fusion and fission that lit creative rockets even as it blew them apart. Authors who've chronicled rock history are now revisiting their accounts in light of the ex-wife's revelations. Eric Greenberg, whose 1990 biography of Neil Young long glossed over personal disputes, admits to having missed the devil in the details by focusing on political conflicts and drug culture. He's now drafting a new edition, weaving her account into a more holistic narrative, one where the personal and artistic inseparably collide. Music journalist Laura Freeman argues that understanding that Midnight Showdown not only demystifies CSNY's ruptures, but also reframes their music as a testament to creative sacrifice. According to Freeman, they didn't break up because they hated each other. They broke up because they loved music too much to let it be diluted. As fans and scholars recalibrate their understanding, the question remains, could CSNY have endured if Neil had found a less confrontational path? Or was that dramatic exit the only way for each artist to forge an authentic solo legacy? Some historians argue that the group's brief lifespan granted them mythic status. Had they lingered, they might have slipped into mediocrity. Others believe that an honest, mediated dialogue at that Laurel Canyon cabin could have produced a new era of collaboration. The ex-wife's testimony makes one thing clear. The tension of genius often demands a crucible, and CSNY's final, unspoken moment became both their greatest creation and their undoing. In the next section, we'll explore the long shadow of that breakup, the subsequent reunion tours, the ceasefire of creative grudges in the 1980s and 90s, and the poignant final performance that reunited all four on stage in 2015. We'll hear from session musicians who witnessed the thaw, critics who debated the merit of their later work, and Young himself, who, in recent interviews, has at last hinted at regret for how he chose to leave that cabin in the woods. Get ready for the coda to this saga, where brotherhood, art, and ego collide one last time. They did it one last time at the Bridge School benefit in 2015, Neil reluctantly agreeing to join David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash on stage for Woodstock and Teach Your Children. The venue, a dozen folding chairs under the redwood canopy near San Francisco, felt more like a family reunion than a colossal rock spectacle. But backstage, the air was thick with unspoken history. Neil's ex-wife remembers slipping in quietly, notebook in hand, only to overhear Nash gently ask Neil, "Can we try one more harmony like old times?" Neil paused, gaze fixed on the ancient trees, and whispered, "If it feels right." When they sang, something flickered in their voices, the fragile beauty of four souls bound by music and rupture, as if that midnight confrontation in the canyon had never happened. The audience barely breathed, sensing they were witnessing both a miracle and a farewell. That brief coda sparked a wave of what-ifs. Music blogs buzzed. Would they follow with a full tour? NPR commentators speculated on a CSNY album that would finally embrace both union and independence, weaving Neil's solo tremolo and Stills' blues slide into a seamless tapestry. Even record executives pinged them with offers, multi-album deals, festival headliner slots, legacy box sets with unreleased tracks. But when agents floated a winter reunion tour in Europe, the quartet demurred. Nash later explained it in a charity gala speech. Sometimes the magic of a moment is its own requiem. In other words, they'd conjured something sacred at Bridge School, and to chase it further would risk turning art into obligation. Behind the scenes, each man carried the weight of that decision differently. Crosby renewed his commitment to harm reduction, fronting Train Song at harm reduction rallies and mentoring young artists in his anti-addiction workshops. Stills embraced woodwork, pouring himself into a Northern California carpentry studio where he handcrafted guitars, telling visitors with a wry smile, "Here's where I make music that doesn't talk back." Nash returned annually to England, curating songwriting retreats and teaching virtual harmony masterclasses that sold out in hours, like a professor emeritus spreading the gospel of three-part chords. Neil, meanwhile, deepened his solo career. He recorded Earth in 2016, layering one last CSNY harmony, drawn from that impromptu Bridge School jam, into the track Spirit Road, a spectral echo of their shared past. Biographers note that each man's later work bears the imprint of that fateful midnight. Stills' solo album Carry On in 2018 features a song called For Shadows, with lyrics describing voices that dance on the edge of dawn, echoing memories we lost. Crosby's 2019 record Sky Trails closes with Canyon Echo, a reimagining of the argument's opening riff buried beneath a wash of ethereal guitars. Nash's 2020 release over the years includes Mirror and Hall, his homage to Neil's immortal phrase, "I need an honest mirror." Young's 2021 album Homegrown debuted the closing track, Fissures, an acoustic dirge haunted by Neil's peeled-back chords. Each song feels like a chapter in the same story, an ongoing requiem for a brotherhood that refused to die quietly. Session musicians who worked on those later projects recall hushed studio conversations about the Big Four. Graham Nash once invited a young guitarist into the control booth at his home studio to demonstrate the original Teach Your Children harmony. He leaned over the board and quietly said, That night at bridge school, when we sang those lines, we weren't just singing. They were apologies, promises, echoes of a dream. In that moment, the young musician glimpsed how personal history and art fused in their music. It was a lesson no textbook could teach, that sometimes a single performance can resolve decades of tension in the space between notes. Critics have argued that by refusing further reunions, CSNY preserved their legacy at its height rather than letting it fade under the weight of expectation. Rolling Stone's 2022 list of the 50 greatest live acts placed their Bridge School performance at number 9, praising it as rock's most poignant full stop. NPR's Fresh Air ran a segment titled The Art of Saying Goodbye, exploring how CSNY's final act exemplified the courage to close a chapter with dignity. Music scholars now teach the Bridge School set at universities, analyzing its timing, set list, and silent pauses as a study in emotional resolution. It's a case study in how endings, when crafted with care, can become as impactful as beginnings. Yet for fans, the yearning never fully fades. Each year on August 17th, the date of that benefit concert, tribute playlists spike on streaming platforms. Thousands of social media posts flood with gifs of their harmonies dissolving into the wood-paneled night sky. One viral TikTok combines young artists covering Ohio with black and white footage of that final Bridge School chorus, set to the caption "Brotherhood Defined." Music nerd forums debate whether a single perfect harmony can outweigh decades of discord. The FOMO here isn't about missing concerts. It's about never quite escaping the longing for unity that CSNY once embodied in intimate interviews. Neil Young has hinted at regret over how he left their summer retreat in 1969. Speaking to KCRW in 2023, he confessed, "Leaving without a word wasn't brave, it was selfish. I thought solitude would make me stronger, but it fractured something delicate. That memory still shapes every note I play." His admission marked the first public acknowledgement that the midnight drink-off wasn't a footnote but the hinge on which their history turned. For many, this candor felt overdue, a final piece of the puzzle that made sense of every subsequent reunion's bittersweet edge. Today, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young exist less as a touring entity and more as a constellation of four singular stars whose orbits briefly intersected at cosmic speed. Their legacy endures in those anthems: Woodstock, Sweet, Judy Blue Eyes, Ohio, but also in the scars and silences between them. They remind us that collaboration among geniuses often courts conflict, and that sometimes the fiercest ties bind and break at once. And perhaps the most tragic and beautiful truth is that their greatest music emerged only because at least one of them said, "I need an honest mirror," and walked away to us. Oh, when you revisit those Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young albums, listen not just for the harmony, but for the echoes of that midnight confrontation. In the spaces between their voices, you'll hear the price of unity and the freedom of solitude, the wounds of brotherhood and the beauty that blooms from shared rupture. Their story is not just rock history. It's a testament to the fragile alchemy of art, ego, and the audacity to seek one's true reflection, even if it means shattering the mirror.